So, game demos. That's what I'm here to talk about today. And more specifically, I want to try and answer the question, should you do a demo? So, who am I? I'm Tana. I like procedural generation. I'm a programmer. I give +3 to your potions on the right, that kind of thing. But today we're going to talk about demos instead. So before I get started, I want to clarify that when I say demo, I mean a freely distributed part of the full game. And I'm not talking about expo demos or conference demos, which are kind of a talk on their own. So, should you do a demo? Demos used to be a pretty important way for you to advertise your game. You'd be included on a demo disc on a magazine, or you'd have a download link on your Steam page. But in the last decade or so, people have kind of realized that demos aren't that great. So if we were to look back and try and distill down what demos were actually for, we could put it into these 4 points. Number 1, increase the awareness of the game. Number 2, let players try the game before they buy it. 3, it lets them see if their system meets the game's requirements. And lastly, it lets players know that they want to spend their money on the full game. So what actually happened to demos? Well, Jesse Schell did a talk in 2013, which displayed this kind of scary graph over here. So that green line at the top is the sales of a game that only had a trailer, which means these ones at the bottom have a mix of a trailer and a demo. So this kind of straight up says, if you have a demo, your sales are halved, which is kind of scary. And what Jesse Schell argued is that when a player sees a game that they're interested in, their goal, their new motive, is to try the unique hook in the game. If your demo provides that hook, they don't need to play the full game anymore, and you've just lost a sale. Maybe this data is kind of old, that was 6 years ago, but I actually contacted the company, and they don't track this data anymore, which kind of says something on its own. So let's look back at this slide, but with a more modern lens. What were demos for? So if we look at number 1, that one's kind of made redundant by the fact that even if people are aware of your game, the demo costs money to make, and then it halves your sales, so that's kind of pointless. And on top of that, streamers and Let's Players are kind of the modern way of raising awareness. On top of that, demos also make the second one, streamers and Let's Players make the second one redundant, on top of the fact that there are so many other games that players could just play for free rather than trying your game. The third one's made redundant by digital distribution, because you can just buy the game, if it doesn't work on your system, you just refund it. And by this point, the only people playing our games are ones that are already interested in playing the game in the first place, which means the only thing they're going to take away is any reason to not play your game. So we've spent a couple minutes on this talk so far, and I think we could pretty easily say, short answer, should you do a demo? No, it's a terrible idea. It halves your sales, and Jesse Schell said you shouldn't. So, yeah, talk's done. But we've still got 10 minutes, so let's get into the long answer. Demos have kind of changed a lot in the last decade. Back in the days when players would just or developers would just give you the first couple levels of their game, but developers have kind of done more and clever and interesting things these days, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. What I want to say is that demos have evolved. Developers that successfully utilize demos don't just give away the first couple levels of their game. They craft an experience that welcomes players into their world. As a result, demos can do a lot of interesting things, like open up games to new audiences or tell different stories without the same constraints. And what I'm going to try and show today is in these 4 categories. Supplementary games are games which are set in the same universe, but don't necessarily have the same characters or plot or even the same mechanics. Zero investment demos are aimed at just being fun as soon as possible and showing off the game as soon as possible. And then marketing tools, even though a demo is a marketing tool, is just kind of clever stuff you can do on top of your demo. One-shot demos are just demos that are aimed at being fun the first time, but not times after that, so that people play the full game instead. So let's start with supplementary games. As I was saying before, these are games that are set inside the universe or associated with your game in some way, but aren't actually the full game. It allows you to tell a different story, or like different characters or different plot lines or different mechanics, and any media or attention your demo gets will be associated with your full game. Night in the Woods does this perfectly. They actually made 2 different supplementary games. The first one was Longest Night, which is this one in the middle, which is kind of like a stargazing game, and it's really cool. And Lost Constellation is an in-universe folktale, kind of told in a Princess Bride kind of fashion, which is this bottom one and top one. The bottom one's my snow bear. It's called Sticky. So this does some interesting things because, firstly, it inducts the player into the entire Night in the Woods universe, but it spoils nothing about the full game. If you compare that to a traditional demo, where they would have played the first 20 minutes, and then they buy the full game and play those first 20 minutes again, it already has advantages. Secondly, it shows the core game loop, but doesn't actually reveal any of the game's content. So like Night in the Woods, which is based around minigames, these 2 supplementary games show a series of minigames and show the player how to like walk around and jump and that kind of thing and interact with stuff, but doesn't reveal any of the full game's minigame. Night in the Woods, some of you might remember, actually does have a stargazing game, but it's actually different to the one that they've done here. And thirdly, Longest Night was actually the vertical slice for the team, so they did it way back in 2013. And then they re-released it in 2015 with canon dialogue before the release of the full game. This has a number of series of benefits for the team, because you can kind of have your storming and your your norming of your group assembly without having any of the consequences on the full project. So it would be a crime to not mention the Stanley Parable as well, because their demo was excellent. They had a problem of they want to show off the Stanley Parable, but they don't want to spoil any of the game's wonder and confusion. So what they did was they created a thing called the Stanley Parable demo, where the player is led around by the narrator, and they're kind of shown different things about how the Stanley Parable demo was made, which kind of parodies game demos in general. What they do next is they eventually devolve into parodying itself, like you can see in this bottom screenshot. So what this does is it actually invokes a lot of the similar emotions that you'd see in the full game. So the player's going to be confused, they're going to find it funny, they're going to just be, they're going to wonder what the hell's going on, basically. But interestingly, it does all of this and conveys all the emotion of the full game without revealing any of the full game's content. The demo doesn't actually contain the iconic 2-door decision that the Stanley Parable is known for. And at the same time, it's actually really good on its own right. So it generates as being a fun, free game, as well as generating all the press. And as I said before, any press associated with your demo will be associated with your full game. If we compare this to Night in the Woods, we can see that they both convey the idea of the game, but in completely different ways and without revealing any of the main game's content. So nextly, I want to talk about zero investment demos. The idea around this is that the player doesn't have to invest time or money or even bandwidth in order to have a go at playing your game. I won't talk about zero investment in terms of money, because that's like free-to-play models, and that's a pretty big talk on its own. But what I will talk about is Mini-Metro, which was the reason I was interested in doing this in the first place. So we have a WebGL demo, which is like on the website, and you can just go and you play it. And the interesting thing about that is that it avoids the EXE barrier, which makes it a lot more accessible to players who might not be as interested in games or tech. If we consider the process for a completely new player to try out a demo on Steam, they have to make a Steam account, install the Steam client, go to the Steam page inside the Steam client, hit the download demo button, wait for it to install, and then they can play. Whereas with a WebGL demo, you go to the website, you play the game. On top of this, it also makes the game very shareable. When you're just sending a link to someone and saying, hey, you should try this out, as opposed to, hey, you should go to this website and download this exe and it's definitely not a virus, it's a lot easier to share and convince your friends to play, ones that might not have played games before. And lastly, they really leaned into the fact of making it zero investment by actually removing the award-winning audio for the game, which gets it down to about 8 megabytes. Overall, this makes the game really accessible to the target casual audience, because you don't have to have a Steam account, you don't have to install anything. It's just there and ready to play. So marketing tools are kind of just something I wanted to fit in here, because the next game does some really clever stuff, which is Nimbada's Space Drone Constructor. So in this one, they were kickstarted, and they did some clever stuff around their demo, which they attribute the demo to successfully getting them kickstarted. So the first thing they did was that they made the demo available for free if you sign up for the newsletter. They were actually worried about this kind of being a dick move, but it actually worked out really well for them, because people weren't that fussed about it, and they went from about 1,000 newsletter signups to 50,000 over the course of the Kickstarter. On top of this, they found that a majority of the backers of the game by the end of it were ones who clicked on the link inside the demo or inside the newsletter that sent the demo, which is pretty cool. So the second thing they realized is that the game doesn't actually look that great still. If you compare the middle one, where there's explosions and there's aliens and things are happening, to the bottom one, which tells you nothing, it looks a lot better when it's moving. So what they did is they built GIF export into the demo after they'd already released it. The way this worked is that you'd play the game, you'd hit F9, and it would export the last 6 seconds, which makes it very easy to share and very easy for players to go look at this cool drone that I made. And they really leaned into this by running GIF competitions on Twitter, which created an interesting cycle where a player would see on Twitter they'd see the cool GIFs people are making on Twitter. They would go download the demo for free, and in the process, sign up for the newsletter. They would play the game for free, they would export their own GIFs, and then the cycle would continue. Overall, this kind of creates this sharing loop, which just generates a lot of attention for your game. So the last category I want to talk about is one-shot demos. The idea behind this is that they're fun to play, but only the first time. Because I've heard a lot of people talk about how, while I was doing research for this talk, they would say oh yeah, I played that demo for 6 hours, and then I didn't buy the full game. And I know that I've seen the same thing with Mini Metro, for example, because we just give away the first level of the game, which is infinitely replayable, technically. But Tom Francis did this really well with Gunpoint. So what he did was that he had a pre-release demo, which was actually reasonably traditional in terms of it gives you the first couple levels, but it changes in the way that it ends the demo. So it starts off kind of teaching you the basics and the core concepts of espionage, like hacking computers and then jumping out of windows. But then it moves on to requiring a particular tool, which is where it gets exciting. So you go into the shop, you buy this tool, you do the next 2 missions, and they're a great time. You finish the mission, and you go to the next one, which now requires another tool. So you go in here, you buy the shop because you buy the item because you already know how to do it, and then before you actually start the mission, the demo ends. So you don't actually get to use this tool you're excitedly just bought, which has actually a couple of interesting consequences. What it does is it shows you the full array of the game's upgrades and then doesn't let you have them. It shows you how to buy them, it shows you what you can do with them, and then, yeah, the demo ends. It cuts you off just as you've had a taste of it. And of course, you could replay the demo, but you won't have any of the stuff you've unlocked. You won't have the upgrades. And so the only real way to sate your hunger for progression is to buy the full game. So we've kind of seen 5 examples of developers that have done lots of interesting things with their demos, which allow players to get excited in different ways. So if we were to loop back to this question, I think we can easily say, long answer, should you do a demo? Yes. Yes. We've seen demos that allow you to tell different stories, ones that don't have the constraints of the full game. We've seen demos that allow you to reach new audiences, ones that might not be interested in games or tech. And we've seen demos that allow you to just get people talking about the game and be excited about it before the full game's out. So if you do have the time, and you do have the resources, and you do have a game that kind of matches one of these categories or more, then yes, you should do a demo. Thanks.